on the inside with the thermal camera. So it's a comfortable, very comfortable building material.
Okay, yep, that's great. So Carroll and Nick, Sydney Kirrawee is the suburb you're in. That's one of in the southern half of Sydney, for those who are not familiar with it. It's quite a nice little spot. What drew you to choosing hemp?
Well, actually, Dick, it's all down to you. I emailed you and asked a bit about insulation, and you said, well, if it was me, I'd look at Hempcrete. And I thought, what? So I went off and did my research, and the more I looked into it, the more I thought it was a fabulous material for all the reasons that everyone else has already said. It's just so lovely, comfortable, cocooning to live in, and it's got the thermal and acoustic properties. And I guess importantly for us, because we did a knockdown rebuild, was to try and minimise our carbon footprint in the whole process.
Okay, yeah, that's good. So we've touched on a few of the advantages there. I guess one of the things that hasn't been discussed at length yet is the running cost for those in our panel who are living in the hemp house. What have you found in terms of the ability of the house to meet your expectations around low running costs?
Yeah, happy to kick off on that one.
Thanks, Geoff.
The house is completed in about February this year, so it's been through the end of summer and right through winter, and the performance, I think I can honestly say, is amazing. Yeah, the stability of the temperature inside the house, regardless of what's going on outside. There is a wood burner heater, which does get run every now and then, but it's mainly for aesthetics. It's not entirely essential because the performance is so good. And it's an 8.8 star house, Nathers, so it's pretty highly insulated, and it's definitely going to, over the life of the building, it's definitely going to be a winner economically, as well as in terms of comfort and health.
Carroll and Nick, how have you found your house running in terms of running costs?
Well, the air conditioning guy said, make sure you run your air conditioner at least once in winter and once in summer, because there's a magnetic switch there that has to be exercised. So we've done that.
The subtext being that you only had to do it to exercise the magnetic switch and not for any other reason.
Yeah. It's very comfortable to live in. The insulation is just amazing. So it can be 40, 45 degrees, which we've been in here now approaching 2 years, actually, surprisingly. And so we've had the best part of one summer and definitely a full summer. And we've had a few days where it's been above 40 degrees outside, and yet we've been comfortable inside, and we didn't actually need to put the aircon on. So it's been great.
Last summer, the bushfires, of course, affected the vast majority of Sydney's air quality rather badly for several days at a time. So it wasn't just the high temperature, it was the fact that we had to stay with our houses closed up to keep them healthy, which leads me to the question that was raised by a couple of you earlier about the control of humidity and the fact that hemp has this technical ability to draw humidity through and allow the whole building to breathe. How does that manifest itself in winter? Probably Sean would be in the strongest position to answer this one.
Well, I would be, except if you look behind me, you can see the mess. We've been in the house for a week.
Okay.
So, however, the building, the hemp has been in since 1st of January. So we've watched it through the summer and coming into the winter. And it seemed that without any heating, without any interaction at all with apart from builders coming in and out, it stabilised around the 13 to 14 degrees inside, and that was without ceilings. So, and now we're living in it. It seems to be stabilising around 16, I suppose, at the moment. I'll know more in about 12 months when it's all gone through the whole season.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. Okay. No, I didn't realise you'd only been in for such a short period of time. So you're still unpacking. Geoff, what's your experience with in terms of condensation and humidity control?
Well, I put in heat recovery ventilation in addition to the permeability of the Hempcrete wall. So I guess you could call that belt and braces. And certainly humidity build-up has never been an issue in the house. And I wouldn't expect it to be. What it would be like without hemp, I got no idea. I guess I have lived in a mouldy house in the distant past, and it's not a nice thing to do. And certainly it hasn't happened in mine, and I don't expect it will.
Oh, that's right. The HRV will, if the hemp wasn't working, the HRV would have to work harder. But yes, you're right. That's certainly belt and braces. Carroll and Nick, have you had any experience with the condensation forming since you've been in the building?
We have on a couple of occasions had condensation around the aluminium frames because unfortunately we couldn't afford thermally broken frames for our windows, but that's the only place, and it's only been on a few occasions. So
on the southern ones.
On the southern windows.
Yeah. Okay.
So compared to the house we used to live in, there's no condensation problem, and certainly no mold problem at all.
And you open the shutters, and the water evaporates within about an hour.
Okay. However, it would be lovely, wouldn't it, if our minimum window manufacturers' compliance standards involved thermally broken frames.
Well, the thing is, it's improving all the time. So while we couldn't afford thermally broken frames 2 years ago, things have changed so much in that period that it may well be an affordable option now.
It's certainly improved, but I guess the argument for minimum standards there is that if everyone had to do it, the economies of scale would be such that the price would come down as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is the one Achilles heel with any building is always the glazing and the frames. It's the skinniest part of the wall construction, and it's the one we have to spend, in a sense, per square metre, we have to spend the most money on by probably a factor of 10. Okay, no, that's great. Look, the other thing I was just wondering about was during the build, the owner-builder experience and the builder experience in terms of hemp. Nick being a builder with a bit of grey hair, or maybe if, somewhere there's some age. I guess the wisdom of age has descended upon you, Nick. As you can see, it has with me as well. From your point of view as a builder, and the owner-builders might want to chime in on this as well, what experience when you made the transition from older style or conventional style constructions to hemp, what sort of things did you have to learn and change in terms of your processes?
Definitely got much better at formwork, which that was a quick learning curve. Trying to get services, as many out of the wall as possible, which is on a design side of things as well. But I've been lucky that I've had the owners involved in a couple of my builds, so that's been really good. You just got to think things through beforehand. You're working out where you're going to build to and from. You're planning out how you do your shuttering, so you don't have to spend so much money on formwork as well, because it's a cost. And I mean, it is reasonably straightforward once you get your head around it. But it's getting all the services in the house. It was quite weird. Carroll and Nick's build, we used Rytec roofing on that. So I had all the electrics in the walls and I had all the plumbing done, everything charged, ready to go. And I still didn't have a roof on at that stage as well. It's a very bizarre feeling for a builder to be at that point, because that usually comes after the roof. And it's also deciding if you're going to have a roof on or if you're not going to have a roof on when you go to do the Hempcrete, because that top section can take considerable amount of time. Nick and Carroll's build, we had the roof on because we had nearly 400 square metres of roofing to go up there, and it was a big build, so we needed that cover. And luckily we did, because it rained a fair bit during construction as well. Tracy's house, Tracy from Connect Design, we had the roof off, and it only took a day to put the roof on. Although the final day, we've just finished doing the gables, and it was that February freak storm that we had here in Sydney. So at midnight, once it dissipated and it was safe to get in the car, I was around at Tracy's pushing water off all the tarps. So it's considerations that you got to make, roof on or roof off during the build as well.
Yeah, from an owner builder's perspective, I guess, quickly getting in there, Nick's right, it's about pre-planning everything. So, you know, realising that your framing sits in the middle of your wall. So it's, in our case, it's 90 mil in from front and back. Knowing where your studs are for later on was very handy. And we found that doing the formwork took longer than putting the hemp in some aspects. So, you know, little corners, and as you get to the top of the wall with the roof on, having people who are somewhat smaller than me with long arms was very handy. And we had a lot of volunteer help, which is a blessing. They came from all over the place and seemed to want to put themselves through days and days and days of tamping. Yeah, so I think, Nick, it's pre-planning and pre-designing is where you save an awful lot of time later on.
Yeah, I'm happy to comment there, Dick. Yeah, I came into the building process pretty cold. Never built anything before I built my house, but I did spend a lot of time in the planning, very detailed planning. I was involved in developing the Eco Village sustainability rules for a couple of years before I started designing my house, so I knew what I was after. And my architects moved to Canada just after they did the architect's drawings, so I did all of the detailed drawings myself. And I employed someone from Envirotecture to do the detail on the hemp. I think you know who that was, Dick. In fact, it was you. And that was important to get that right. But even more important, because I knew I didn't know anything, I employed a local builder to bring in his regular tradies and quote to me. And then he came in and did the set out with me and pointed me in the right direction. Otherwise, it would, I would never have got out of the ground. But after that, it became easier as I went along, and I was quite happy with the owner-builder process by the end. I did employ a couple of specialist hemp builders for the actual build, hemp workshop, and that was one of the easier parts of the build and one of the more pleasant parts. Having all those really nice people come and do a workshop was just brilliant.
Oh, that's great. Just a quick response from each of you, if I could, just to get a feel for it. Thickness of wall, the external hemp walls. Geoff, how thick are yours?
250 mil, and that's plenty for our close to Sydney environment. Yep.
Nick, typically what would you be building in Sydney?
200 mil.
200, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Is that's thinner than most? Is that because you're often working on inner urban sites where site area is at a premium?
Correct.
Yeah, and you've also got the heat island effect that tends to regulate the temperatures. You might get the high extremes, but you don't get the low extremes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sean?
270, yeah.
270, that's an interesting
270. Because, well, so 90 mil framing, and we used 90mm blocks of spacers. So I just went on Clara's advice from Australian Hemp Masonry for that.
Cool, good. And Carroll and Nick, how thick are your external walls?
Well, we had Nick Sowden as our builder, although Dr. Nick, as he was known on site, did a lot of the actual Hempcrete work as well. And so our walls are 200 thick. So, and for where we are in Sydney, their performance is quite adequate.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, that's interesting. So 200 through to 270 is the kind of range there. That's interesting, yeah, because I don't get to talk to a lot of other people about what they're doing at that level of detail. So that's interesting for me alone. So let's talk.
Sorry, Dick. Sorry,
yeah.
we've got lots of great questions on the Q&A as well of people hungry for some information. Maybe we could jump to a couple of those. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
Yeah. Did you want? I can pull one out if you like, just while you have a chance to read them. There's one around the cost differentiation in building with hemp compared to other sustainable home building systems, such as SIP systems, which is an acronym that may be good to unpack first.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so answering that question, a SIP is a structural insulated panel. And there are some hybrid SIPs, like in the previous session, the straw bale SIP within a timber frame, the timber frame being the load-bearing component of it. Some other SIPs use different systems. But perhaps, Nick, you could kick off with an answer to this one. I've got a few feelings myself, but I don't want to dominate this one.
It really does depend on the complexity of the build as well, especially for smaller inner city jobs. Just getting materials up to your top floor, and being single floor or top floor, it makes a difference on how much it's going to cost. Tracy, how much was yours per square metre? We worked that out at about 230.
I thought you said the other day it was 120.
No, it's definitely in the 200s. And that's per square metre. That's including material, labour, formwork, sort of the whole kit and caboodle.
But mine was quite
complex. Sorry, what was that, Trace?
Mine was quite complex with lots of little nooks and crannies and turns because of council requirements, where Carroll and Nick's was quite simple in form and a single level.
But they also had the complexity at the rooftop, which chews up time as well. Other builds that I've done, like Holly and Simon's, which was the first one we did, that worked out at about $330 for a square metre, but that was including roof insulation and wall insulation. So it can range quite considerably depending on the complexity of the build. As for a comparison compared to a SIP, I haven't priced SIPs for walls before. So Dick, that's probably a question that you could answer a bit better.
Well, it really depends upon which particular SIP system you're talking about. So some of the SIPs might be cheaper. In fact, some of them would be very much cheaper, but most of those would not then tick the box of being sustainable, simply because they'd be using materials derived from fossil fuels or steel or other components in there that basically leave them with a carbon debt. One of the big things, and there's another question down here I see from Ellie Robertson, one of the big things about hemp is the way it actually soaks up carbon. It is very much a carbon sequestering material, and that is what sets it apart from most other construction systems. So moving on to that question, Ellie Robertson has asked, you say that the hemp soaks up carbon. Is there a point where it is saturated and will not soak up anymore? So yes, there is. If I can just jump in on that one, the hemp obviously is soaking up carbon when it's growing in the paddock. It then chews up, or rather emits carbon during the harvesting and processing process, but that's a small proportion of the amount that it's sequestered during growing. And then when it is curing, it is, there's some carbon emitted through the construction process, obviously, as the builders do their thing. And one of the other components is lime, which has a certain carbon debt. And then when it's installed in the wall during the curing process, it starts sucking up CO2 again, so that the net result is when it's fully cured, that it has soaked up a lot more carbon than it has emitted. Now, can't give you hard numbers on that because it varies from building to building. How far was the building from the site? Where did it have to get processed, etc., and so forth. So there's a lot of variables that go into that. But as a rule, it is always very much a carbon negative process. And a number of panelists, and please guys jump in on this one if you want to, have mentioned, and Tracy you too, about that being an important thing, I guess, for many of us that are interested in things like sustainability and the things that Renew does. That is a high priority. Just a quick one to the panel. How high a priority was that when you were making your decisions?
Well, I guess, being in an eco-village, that was probably number one for me, is the sustainability aspect of the material.
Sean?
Yeah, exactly the same here. Unfortunately, we had to freight ours down from New South Wales, which was a horrible carbon addition, but sustainability. And also we have a fledgling hemp industry here in Tasmania, and we'll be producing our own herd. So it was about helping the industry along as well.
Another question there, is there any way I can build hemp with hemp on a budget, e.g. under $300,000? Yeah, certainly. You can build a one-room building for probably $50,000 or $60,000. So it really is a piece of string. It depends on the complexities of the building and its size and the kind of finishes that you put into it, and also the difficulties of the site and its distance. So we get a lot of inquiries from people who are on very small budgets, and they want very small, modest buildings, but they're a long way from anywhere, and that can be the thing that makes life difficult. So moving on to a question from Margaret. Do hemp walls need to be supported by a wooden frame, or can it be used without it? If the latter, what is the weight-bearing capacity enough to support a roof? Nick, do you want to throw an answer to that one?
Hempcrete is a walling system. So the structure is actually the timber framing. I think it's, when they did testing at Uni New South Wales, it comes in about 5 MPa, which is a strength rating, which isn't strong enough to support a roof. Mm-hmm. And it's also been designed, the Australian hemp masonry product has also been designed so that it's got the least amount of binder in it to give it enough strength, so it's lowering the embodied energy in the product as well, in the overall build.
And in terms of certification, the beauty of having that load-bearing timber frame in the middle is that when the certifier asks what the structural system is, you say it's a timber frame to Australian Standard AS 1684, which is completely compliant with the National Construction Code, and you just tick that box and move straight on. Okay. Kat in Brisbane is asking, what wall thickness and stud size would you recommend for Brisbane, taking into account affordability? Just to throw a little cedar into that last bit about affordability, one of the major growing centres is in Ashford in the north of the state, and that's not far from Brisbane at all. So this is not a Sydney-centric product. But stud size and wall thickness. Yeah, look, I'm going to go off-piste here and say, Trace, what would you say for Brisbane?
In terms of, I would say 200's the least you can go. And I mean, Brisbane's a lot warmer, but I've often been surprised it can be quite cool in winter. So whether there's benefit of going any thicker, I'm not sure. I would say 200 would be good.
Nick, you had your hand up.
You also need about 55 mil of cover over the studs as well.
Mm. And that's a question, in terms of the stud size, we have done 70 mil at the centre of the wall. So the stud in most of our designs is in the middle with your hempcrete on either side. The stud size really comes down to the engineer. So the engineer we use, he prefers on the lower level the 90 mil stud, but on the upper level he's more negotiable because it just means we can get more hemp.
And the other factor with Brisbane is that it's in the southern end of the cyclonic zone. So the frame itself is going to have to be designed for the cyclonic rating. And that's going to have a big effect on bracing.
Mm-hmm.
And bracing is one of those technical things. I don't know if there's a question about bracing, but if there isn't, there should be, people. Because the industry as a rule is now using sheet bracing because it's quite structurally efficient, but that acts as a bit of a divider through the middle of the wall. Sean, down in Tassie, you've got a bit of wind load there in the front of the Western Tiers. What was your bracing system?
Yeah, so our wind load was only N1, so it wasn't too bad.
Got off lightly.
Yeah, we did. However, we used hardwood diagonal bracing so we used a 90 by 45 stud all the way through, and then we used a lot of hardwood diagonal bracing across the corners and under windows, which made it very awkward to hemp around. We also had to educate the surveyors in not using bracing ply, but they were very open to it in the end. So that's how we went around it, and we also used metal strapping, which we used bitumen paint over any metal surface, and that was deemed to comply in the end. Yeah.
Yep. Nick, got any comments on that one?
I mainly use metal bracing, strap bracing with tensioners, and then coat it as well.
Right. And for tie downs,
so that's been our standard. I have used diagonal plywood in the past. Tie downs, I use Worth screws, so they're buried in the actual frame instead of having metal straps going over the top.
Okay, something funny going on with your sound there. And now a really good question here from Barbara. I want to build a certified passive house. Passive house plus, if possible. Is there any reason why hemp could not be used to construct a passive house? Can hempcrete be used to form prefabricated panels so that the construction time for a house is reduced? Like Carroll, I intend to do a knockdown rebuild in about 18 to 24 months. There are two questions there. Let's answer the first one. First, Nick, have you had any experience with passive house yet?
I am a passive house certified tradesperson, but I haven't built a passive house yet.
Right, okay. We also are certified passive house designers up here, and we have a Hempcrete passive house under final tender negotiations at the moment, but have yet to do construction. And I'm not aware of anyone in Australia who has... Sean's put his hand up. Yes, he knows someone. Sean, come in.
So Andreas McMahon, who was my builder, even though I was owner builder, he's building one down at Police Point, down in southern Tasmania right now.
Brilliant.
Hemp house, yeah.
Fantastic. I would hope that we'd be seeing that on Sustainable House Day next year.
I hope so.
Yeah. So, Barbara, in answer to your question, it certainly is possible. The big challenge is around the air tightness and the detailing of that basically at the perimeter of every hemp panel or wall. Mm. So it'd be really interesting to see what Andreas is doing with that. And we've invented some details for this one we're doing, but this is where in this very collaborative neck of the industry, everybody tends to share their experience with everyone else, which is marvellous. and that sort of thing is likely to get a run in one of the issues of Renew. I'm hoping we'll certainly share our experience, and maybe that one can get shared as well. Geoff or anybody else on the panel, I don't know yet. Geoff's got a comment?
Yeah, I personally went around and sealed every opening in the exterior of the house as part of the build process because I wouldn't trust anyone else to do it.
Did you do a blower door test?
No.
Okay. So for those who are watching who don't know what Passive House is, I'm not going to give you the full story now, but do a bit of research. There's a lot out there. And one of the tests is that you pump the building up with a blower door test to 50 pascals of pressure and then measure the amount of air that is leaking simply by how much air is being pumped in. Air in equals air out. And you have to achieve less than 0.6 air changes for the whole building volume per hour. So it's a pretty stringent standard, and we're going to be very interested to see how it performs. So yeah, I guess watch this space. The second part of Barbara's question is, can Hempcrete be used to form prefabricated panels? Nick?
Can it be done? Yes, and I know a certain designer that just had some designed recently.
Trace?
And pass it back to you, Dick.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to deflect.
Envirotecture.
It's still a work in progress. We've been working with the Australian Hemp Masonry Company for 18 months now on a hemp SIP. It's a hybrid SIP, so there's a load-bearing primitive frame. And the hemp is acting as a insulation and breather membrane. But that's still a work in progress. So look, the short answer is yes, it can. There are blocks available in Western Australia, but I'm not suggesting you bring them across to the east, but for those in the west, they're a pretty good option. They can be built as just a freestanding wall. So yes, the short answer is that it can. Now Jess is jumping in here because I think she wants us to wrap up in about 2 minutes' time.
We'll be able to take one more question, but maybe just hear from one panelist. You'll see how we go. And I want time to thank you all as well. So yeah, 2-minute warning.
Okay. Look, probably there are some real good questions here, and I'm going to try and answer them during the day. But Jimmy Tang has asked the most obvious one that gets asked most often, and we've touched on it before, but let's just look at it now quickly. How does the cost compare to use hemp versus traditional bricks? Now, Nick, we have a response to that, but Nick, what would you say to that one?
I don't traditionally build with bricks. Brick veneer, I just say no to, like just flat out no. So I'm not the typical builder in that sense. So I'm actually not well positioned to answer that question.
Trace, you got a feeling on that one?
It was always discussed that it was comparable to brick veneer construction, but I think it's not fair because brick veneer wouldn't give you the performance or the comfort that a hempcrete home gives you. And all of the reasons that was discussed before, the acoustics, the thermal. So it's not a fair comparison.
Yeah. Yeah, the usual, I'm on the same page as Nick. We just say no to brick veneer. We would probably say it's about the same cost as uninsulated full brick or really well insulated brick veneer. But like Trace said, you're comparing apples with oranges. So it's not an easy question to answer, but it is certainly the most commonly asked question. So Jess, are we right out of time now?
Unfortunately, we are, yes. So people can still ask questions on people's profiles as well, and those links have been shared earlier in the chat. But I will just take the opportunity to thank you for emceeing this session and to all our wonderful panelists